A Tuesday morning arrived gray and heavy over the city, the low clouds carrying the weight of another ordinary day that would unfold into extraordinary situations for those willing to see beyond the surface. In the main corridor of City General Hospital, the morning bustle followed its usual rhythm. Hurried nurses carrying medications, doctors walking with clipboards, family members waiting for news on uncomfortable benches that daily witnessed human despair and hope. Among this crowd of anonymous faces, a figure walked slowly down the corridor, her measured steps dictated not by the haste that dominated the environment, but by the pain radiating from every movement. She was a woman of about 60, her gray hair pulled back in a simple bun, wearing a faded navy blue coat that had seen better days. Her hands, marked by the deep lines only decades of hard work can carve, carefully held a small brown leather purse, as worn as her coat but impeccably clean. What stood out most about her was not her simple clothes or the hair ruffled by the morning wind, but the way she walked. Each step seemed calculated, not out of vanity or pretense, but out of a need to mask a pain that spread throughout her body. Her slightly stooped posture suggested years of hard labor, perhaps cleaning other people's houses or caring for people who never knew her name. Even so, there was something about her bearing that radiated a quiet dignity, an inner strength that resisted being broken by the adverse circumstances life had thrown her way. She approached the reception desk, where a young receptionist with perfectly styled blonde hair and impeccable nails typed rapidly on the computer without looking up. The sound of the keys echoed down the corridor like a machine gun of indifference, creating an invisible barrier between her and anyone who dared interrupt her concentration. The woman waited patiently for a few minutes, standing before the counter, her hands still holding the purse with the same delicacy one might hold a family heirloom. She didn't clear her throat, tap her fingers on the cold marble counter, or show impatience. She simply waited, like someone accustomed to waiting, someone who had learned throughout life that her presence wasn't always immediately recognized or valued. Finally, the receptionist looked up, but her gaze was quick and superficial, like someone quickly assessing whether it was worth paying attention to whoever stood before them. What she saw was a simple woman in worn-out clothes, lacking the bearing or appearance that usually commanded immediate respect in that hospital environment, where doctors in white coats were treated like royalty and wealthy families received automatic professional smiles. "Yes?" said the receptionist, her voice laced with a mechanical courtesy that couldn't quite hide a hint of barely disguised impatience. The woman took a deep breath before speaking, as if she needed to gather strength for each word she was about to utter. Her voice, when it finally came, was soft but clear, carrying a natural politeness that didn't depend on diplomas or certificates, but on the wisdom only life can teach. "Good morning, dear. I'm here to visit my grandson. He's in room 237. His name is Gabriel Miller. He's 12 years old." The receptionist turned her attention back to the computer, typing the name with mechanical movements. Her expression remained neutral, as if she were processing just another request on a morning that promised to be long and repetitive. "Visiting hours don't start until 2 o'clock," she replied, without looking up from the screen. The woman remained motionless for a moment, processing the information. Her hands tightened slightly on the purse strap, the only outward sign that the answer had had any impact. She had woken up at 5 in the morning, taken 3 different buses to get there, saving on bus fare to be able to buy some fresh fruit for her grandson. The journey had taken over 2 hours, and every move on public transport had been a battle against the back pain that had plagued her for years. "Miss," she said, her voice still soft but now carrying a respectful determination. "I understand the rules, but I came from very far away. Would it be possible to make an exception, just for a few minutes?" The receptionist finally looked up, but her gaze was cold and impatient. It was the kind of expression that people in positions of little power sometimes use to assert authority over those they consider to be in an inferior position. "The rules are for everyone, ma'am. I can't make exceptions. If everyone starts asking for exceptions, it'll become a mess here." A heavy silence settled between them. The woman looked around the corridor, observing other people being attended to. She noticed how a man in a suit had arrived after her and was already being directed to the elevator, how a well-dressed woman had passed straight through the counter without being questioned about visiting hours. But she said nothing about these observations. Instead, she simply nodded her head, a gesture that carried decades of experience in accepting unequal treatment without confrontations. "I understand," she murmured, her voice almost a whisper. "Thank you anyway." She moved away from the counter slowly, each step revealing not only the physical pain she carried, but also the emotional weight of yet another small humiliation added to so many others throughout her life. She found an empty bench in the corridor and sat down carefully, placing her purse on her lap like a protective shield against the world that seemed determined to test her patience and resilience. During the following hours, she remained there, observing the hospital's activity. She saw doctors hurrying past, families arriving and being promptly directed to rooms, nurses carrying equipment. Occasionally, she took a small water bottle from her bag and sipped small amounts, always sparingly, like someone accustomed to making the little she had last. Around 11 in the morning, an elderly man in a white coat approached the waiting area. His gray hair was impeccably combed, and there was something about his posture that suggested not only medical authority, but a wisdom acquired through decades of experience dealing with human pain and hope. He had noticed the woman hours before, discreetly observing her while making his morning rounds. There was something about her presence that had caught his attention. Perhaps it was the dignified way she waited, or the serene patience she radiated even while clearly uncomfortable on the hard bench. He had witnessed the conversation at the reception desk and felt a pang of discomfort at the coldness of the treatment she had received. Dr. Henry Martinez wasn't just a respected doctor at City General Hospital. He was an institution. 40 years of his career had taught him that medicine goes far beyond diagnoses and treatments. He had learned that healing sometimes simply means recognizing the humanity in every person who walks the halls of a hospital, especially those society tends to make invisible. He approached the woman with measured steps, his hands in his coat pockets, a gentle expression softening the lines on his experienced face. "Good morning, ma'am," he said, his voice imbued with a genuine cordiality that contrasted sharply with the mechanical treatment she had received at the reception desk. "Excuse my intrusion, but I couldn't help but notice you've been here for several hours. May I ask if everything is all right?" The woman looked up, surprised by the kind approach. Her eyes met his, and for a moment she seemed to assess whether she could trust this show of genuine interest. She had learned throughout her life to be wary of unexpected kindness, especially from people in positions of authority. "I'm waiting for visiting hours, doctor," she replied, her voice carrying a natural politeness that didn't need artifice to be respectful. "I came to visit my grandson, Gabriel. He's been hospitalized for 3 days." Dr. Martinez nodded sympathetically. There was something in the way she said her grandson's name that revealed the full extent of her love and concern. It was the kind of love that grandmothers dedicate to their grandchildren, pure, unconditional, willing to face any adversity. "Gabriel Miller, room 237?" he asked, showing that he knew the case. The woman's eyes lit up immediately, a spark of hope shining amidst the resignation that had dominated her morning. Yes, do you know him? How is he? Nobody tells me anything properly, and I'm so worried. The doctor sat down next to her on the bench, a simple but significant gesture that put them both on the same level, instantly eliminating any hierarchical barrier that might have existed between them. Gabriel is responding very well to treatment, he said, his voice carrying a calmness that only decades of medical experience can provide. The pneumonia he developed is being controlled with antibiotics, and we expect him to be able to go home by the end of the week. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, as if she were physically absorbing the relief that these words brought. Her hands, which had been tense on her bag, finally relaxed. "Thank you, doctor. Thank you so much. I was so worried. He's my grandson, but I raised him since he was little. His mother had to go to work in another city, and his father, well, his father was never very present." Dr. Martinez listened attentively, recognizing in her story a pattern he had witnessed countless times throughout his career. Women like her who assumed family responsibilities with silent dedication, often facing financial and physical difficulties to care for grandchildren, neighbors' children, any child who needed love and protection. It is at this moment in the story that I need to pause to speak directly to you who are following this narrative. If stories like this touch your heart, if you believe that small gestures of humanity can change the world, I would like to invite you to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell. It's not just about numbers or statistics, it's about creating a community of people who still believe in human kindness, who understand that every story shared can plant a seed of compassion in someone's heart. Because stories like that of Mrs. Helena, which you are now getting to know, need to be told, heard, and above all, lived by all of us in our daily lives. Dr. Martinez remained silent for a few moments, processing not only her words, but the whole life of sacrifices and dedication they represented. There was something deeply touching in the way she spoke about Gabriel, a mixture of unconditional love and maternal concern that had shaped her entire existence around the well-being of a child who wasn't even biologically hers. "You said you came from far away today," he asked, although he already suspected the answer from the way she had arrived at the hospital, tired but determined, in clothes that suggested a long journey on public transport. "I came from the other side of the city, doctor. I left home at 5 in the morning, took 3 buses. Normally, I wouldn't be able to come every day, but a neighbor lent me the bus fare because she saw how worried I was." The simplicity with which she recounted her morning journey contained a dignity that deeply touched the seasoned physician. He had witnessed over decades how true love manifests not in grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in silent actions and daily sacrifices that go unnoticed by most of the world. "You know," he said, rising from the bench with a sudden resolve, "I think we can bend the rules a bit today. Gabriel would certainly be happy to see you." The woman's eyes widened with surprise and gratitude. She had spent the entire morning resigned to waiting, accustomed as she was to accepting that the world's rules weren't always flexible for people like her. The possibility of seeing Gabriel sooner seemed almost too good to be true. But the receptionist said it wasn't possible. Dr. Martinez smiled, a smile that held decades of experience navigating hospital bureaucracy when humanity demanded that certain rules be tempered with compassion. "Well, it so happens that I'm the chief of staff at this hospital," he said, with a humility that made his authority even more impressive. He offered his arm to help her up, a gesture she accepted with gratitude. As they walked towards the elevator, other hospital staff watched them with curiosity. It was unusual to see the chief of staff personally escorting a visitor, especially one who clearly didn't belong to the social circle that usually received VIP treatment. During the trip to Gabriel's room, Dr. Martinez chatted with her about various things. He asked about her health, how she was coping with raising a grandson, about her own challenges. She responded with an openness that revealed the relief of finally having someone who seemed genuinely interested in listening to her as a person, not just another visitor in a crowded hospital. When they arrived at room 237, Dr. Martinez gently knocked before opening the door. Gabriel was awake, gazing out the window with the melancholy expression that hospitalized children often develop. When he saw his grandmother entering the room, his face lit up with a pure joy that made the entire morning sacrifice worthwhile. "Grandma Helena!" he exclaimed, trying to sit up in bed despite the tubes and equipment connecting him to the medical monitors. Helena approached the bed with tears in her eyes, but they were tears of relief and happiness. She held her grandson's hand with a gentleness that contrasted with the strength of her love. "My boy," she murmured, her voice choked with emotion. "How are you feeling?" Dr. Martinez watched the scene from the doorway, deeply moved by the interaction between grandmother and grandson. There was something magically healing about that moment. He could see how her presence instantly changed Gabriel's demeanor. The boy seemed more animated, stronger, as if his grandmother's love had literally infused new energy into his recovering body. "Doctor," Gabriel said, turning to Dr. Martinez, "this is my grandma Helena. She's the most important person in the world to me." The doctor smiled, approaching the bed. "I can see that, Gabriel, and I'm sure you're equally important to her." Helena spent the next hour beside her grandson's bed, holding his hand, telling funny stories to make him laugh, arranging the flowers she had brought in a water bottle that served as a makeshift vase. It was evident to any observer that there was a deep connection between them, the kind of bond that forms when two people face life's adversities together. During this time, Dr. Martinez remained in the room, performing some routine checks on Gabriel, but mostly observing the interaction between grandmother and grandson. As a seasoned physician, he understood the therapeutic power of family love, especially in pediatric cases where emotional support can significantly accelerate the recovery process. When it was finally time for Helena to leave, she didn't want to overstay her welcome, and she knew Gabriel needed to rest. The goodbye was touching. Gabriel held his grandmother's hand for a long moment, as if he wanted to absorb a little more of her strength and love before she left. "Grandma, thank you for coming. I know it's hard for you to get here." Helena kissed her grandson's forehead, a kiss that carried decades of maternal love concentrated in a single gesture. "There's nowhere in the world I'd rather be than here with you, my angel. I'll be back tomorrow, you can be sure." Dr. Martinez accompanied Helena back to the hallway, and during the walk, she turned to him with a gratitude that words couldn't adequately express. "Doctor, I don't know how to thank you. You have no idea what this meant to me, to both of us." He shook his head, genuinely touched by the simplicity of her gratitude. "Mrs. Helena, it was a privilege to meet you, and I want you to know that the visiting rules will be more flexible in your case. Gabriel needs you as much as you need him." While they waited for the elevator, Dr. Martinez reflected on how that morning had unfolded. It had started as an ordinary day, with his usual routine of medical rounds and administrative meetings. But the encounter with Helena had transformed his perspective, reminding him of the reasons he had chosen medicine decades ago. "May I ask you something, doctor?" Helena said as they waited. "Of course. Why did you do that for me? I mean, I know you don't know me, and I'm just an ordinary person." Dr. Martinez looked at her with an expression that blended wisdom and melancholy, like someone who had learned important lessons through painful experiences. "Mrs. Helena, many years ago, when I was a young doctor just out of medical school, my own grandmother fell ill. She was a simple woman like yourself who had dedicated her life to caring for her family. When she was hospitalized, I was studying for an important exam and thought I could visit her the following day." He paused, the emotion evident in his voice. "She passed away that night, alone, and I never forgave myself for prioritizing my studies over being with her in her final moments. Since then, I've promised myself that whenever possible, I would make sure families wouldn't go through the same pain I did." Helena was silent for a moment, understanding that she had been the beneficiary not only of a doctor's kindness, but of a promise made decades ago in memory of a grandmother who had passed away without her grandson by her side. "Your grandmother would be proud of the man you've become," she said, her voice soft yet firm. The elevator arrived, and as they descended toward the ground floor, they remained in comfortable silence, each processing the lessons that morning had brought. For Helena, it had been a confirmation that good people still existed in the world, people willing to bend the rules when humanity demanded it. For Dr. Martinez, it had been a reminder that the most effective medicine often happens in the simplest and most human moments. When they reached the ground floor, Helena headed for the exit, but before leaving, she turned one last time to the doctor. "Doctor, you restored my faith in the goodness of people. Thank you so much." Dr. Martinez watched Helena cross the hospital lobby toward the exit, her steps still measured by the physical pain she carried, but now with a lightness that wasn't present when she had arrived that morning. There was something deeply satisfying in knowing he had made a difference in someone's life, not through a complex medical procedure or a brilliant diagnosis, but simply through an act of basic human compassion. After Helena left, Dr. Martinez went to the reception desk, where the same receptionist was still working, now processing a stack of papers with the same mechanical efficiency she had demonstrated hours before. "Sandra," he said, approaching the counter. The receptionist looked up, immediately straightening her posture upon recognizing the chief medical officer. "Yes, Dr. Martinez. The woman who was here this morning, waiting to visit her grandson in room 237, I'd like to talk about how she was treated." Dr. Martinez's tone was calm, but there was an underlying seriousness that made Sandra realize this wouldn't be a casual conversation. "Sir, I just followed standard visiting protocol." "Sandra," he interrupted gently, "protocol is important, yes, but our function here goes beyond following rules. We are responsible for caring not only for the patients, but also for their families." That woman had traveled for hours to see a sick grandson. A little flexibility and compassion wouldn't have compromised our efficiency. Sandra lowered her eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. She had worked at the hospital for 3 years, always focusing on following procedures and keeping everything running smoothly. The idea that she should have considered the individual circumstances of each person was something that hadn't occurred to her before. "I understand, doctor. I'll try to be more considerate in the future." It's not just about being considerate, Sandra. It's about remembering that every person who comes through this counter is experiencing one of the most difficult moments of their lives. A sick child, a hospitalized parent, a wife in surgery. Our responsibility is to make that experience a little less painful, not more difficult. Dr. Martinez wasn't just correcting an employee, he was planting a seed of understanding about the true purpose of hospital work. He had learned over decades that healing happens on multiple levels, and the treatment families receive is as important as direct medical care. That afternoon, during his usual rounds, Dr. Martinez passed by Gabriel's room and found the boy much more cheerful. The boy was sitting in bed, drawing in a notebook he had brought from home. "How are you feeling, Gabriel?" the doctor asked, checking the medical chart. "Much better, doctor. My grandma's visit made me feel like I'm almost cured." Dr. Martinez smiled, confirming what he already knew, that family love is one of the most powerful medicines available, although it rarely appears in traditional medical prescriptions. "Your grandmother is a very special woman," he commented. "She's the best person in the world," Gabriel replied without hesitation. "When my mom had to go work far away, Grandma Helena told me she would always take care of me. And she kept her promise. Sometimes I hear her crying from back pain at night, but she never complains. She just wants to make sure I'm okay." Gabriel's words painted an even more understanding of Helena's life. A woman carrying not only the physical responsibilities of raising a grandson, but also the silent pains of a life dedicated to caring for others, frequently putting her own needs last. Over the following days, Helena returned to the hospital daily. Each time she arrived, she was greeted with respectful courtesy by Sandra, who had clearly reflected on her conversation with Dr. Martinez. The receptionist now made a point of greeting her by name, asking about Gabriel, and even offering water when she noticed Helena had made a long trip. On Thursday, when Gabriel was discharged, Dr. Martinez made sure to be present. He had followed the boy's recovery not only as a doctor, but as someone who had become personally invested in the family's well-being. Gabriel is completely cured, he announced to Helena, who was anxiously awaiting the results of the final tests. You can take him home today. Helena's joy was instantaneous and radiant. She hugged her grandson with tears of happiness, murmuring words of gratitude that came straight from her heart. "Doctor," she said, turning to Dr. Martinez, "how can I ever thank you for everything you've done for us?" "You don't need to thank me, Mrs. Helena. But if you want to do something for me, continue being the wonderful grandmother you are. Keep showing Gabriel that there are people in the world who love unconditionally." As Helena and Gabriel prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez reflected on the events of the week. What had begun as a chance encounter in the hospital hallway had blossomed into a profound lesson about compassion, dignity, and the transformative power of small human gestures. He had witnessed how a simple decision to bend the rules for a few minutes had impacted not only Helena and Gabriel, but had created ripple effects throughout the hospital staff. Sandra had become noticeably more attentive to families. Other staff members had begun to notice the individual needs of visitors more, and Dr. Martinez himself had been reminded of the core values that had originally drawn him to medicine. That night, alone in his office after a particularly long day, Dr. Martinez wrote a note in his personal journal, something he had done sporadically throughout his career to record moments that had deeply touched him. Today, I was reminded that our role as healthcare professionals goes far beyond diagnoses and treatments. I met a grandmother who had sacrificed her entire morning, her physical health, and her meager financial resources to be at the side of her sick grandson. She didn't ask for special treatment, didn't complain about the strict rules, didn't demand attention. She simply waited with the quiet dignity of someone accustomed to accepting life's hardships. Yet, it was precisely this dignity that touched me and reminded me that small acts of compassion can completely transform someone's experience during one of the most difficult moments of their lives. The story of Helena and Gabriel spread quietly through the hospital in the following days, not as gossip or sensationalism, but as a silent example of how small changes in how we treat people can create lasting impacts. Staff members began paying more attention to the individual circumstances of visitors. Supervisors began emphasizing the importance of compassion along efficiency, and the hospital atmosphere itself became subtly more welcoming. 2 weeks later, Dr. Martinez received a handwritten letter in his office. The handwriting was careful, but clearly from someone who had learned to write later in life. Each letter formed with deliberation and care. "Dear Dr. Martinez," the letter began, "I want you to know that Gabriel is completely recovered and returned to school this week. He constantly talks about your kindness and how you treated us with respect when others did not. More importantly, you gave me back something I had lost over the years: faith that there are still good people in the world, people willing to look beyond appearances and treat everyone with dignity. I don't have much to offer besides my gratitude, but I want you to know that your kindness had an impact that goes far beyond what you can imagine. With all my gratitude and affection, Helena Santos." Dr. Martinez read the letter several times, deeply touched by the simple and sincere eloquence of Helena's words. He had received many thank you letters throughout his career, mostly from families whose loved ones he had helped save through complex medical procedures. But there was something particularly touching about Helena's gratitude, perhaps because she was thanking him not for a medical miracle, but for something far more fundamental, for being treated as a human being worthy of respect and compassion. He kept the letter in a special drawer of his desk, along with other correspondence he had received over the years from patients and families who had deeply touched his life. But Helena's letter would occupy a special place in that collection, serving as a constant reminder that the most important medicine often requires no diplomas or sophisticated equipment, but simply the willingness to see the humanity in every person who crosses our path. Months later, Dr. Martinez was making his morning rounds when he noticed a familiar figure in the hospital hallway. It was Helena, but this time she wasn't there as an anxious visitor. Instead, she wore a simple volunteer uniform and carried a tray of fresh flowers. "Mrs. Helena!" he exclaimed, genuinely surprised and pleased to see her. She turned with a radiant smile, clearly happy to see him again. "Dr. Martinez, it's so good to see you again. What brings you back to the hospital? I hope it's nothing serious." Helena laughed softly, a sound that carried a lightness that hadn't been present during the difficult days of Gabriel's hospitalization. "No, doctor. Thank God, Gabriel is perfectly fine. Actually, I'm here as a volunteer. After everything we experienced here, I felt I wanted to give back somehow. I come twice a week to talk to families who are waiting, take flowers to the rooms, help out wherever I'm needed." Dr. Martinez was deeply moved by the revelation. He had witnessed many forms of gratitude throughout his career, but rarely had he seen someone transform a difficult personal experience into an opportunity to serve others going through similar hardships. "That's extraordinary, Mrs. Helena. I'm sure your presence makes a huge difference to the families who are going through difficult times." "You know, doctor," she said, delicately adjusting the flowers on the tray, "when I was here that day, waiting to see Gabriel, I felt so alone and helpless. I thought that maybe other people feel the same way. If I can offer a little company, a kind word, or simply someone to listen, it's already worthwhile." Helena's transformation from recipient of compassion to dispenser of it represented the kind of virtuous cycle Dr. Martinez had learned to recognize and value. She had experienced kindness in a moment of vulnerability and was now perpetuating that kindness to others in similar situations. During the following weeks, Dr. Martinez observed Helena in action during his rounds. She had a natural gift for identifying families who needed emotional support. It could be a young mother awaiting news about her son's surgery, a confused elderly nan trying to navigate the hospital bureaucracy, or simply someone who needed a comforting human presence during a moment of anxiety. What most impressed Dr. Martinez was Helena's authenticity. She didn't offer empty words of consolation or unrealistic promises. Instead, she offered her genuine presence, her ability to listen without judgment, and her unique ability to make people feel seen and valued. These were qualities forged through her own experiences of adversity and now became tools of healing for others. One day, Dr. Martinez witnessed Helena comforting a woman who had just received devastating news about her husband's diagnosis. The woman was inconsolable, alternating between tears and outrage at the injustice of the situation. Helena simply sat beside her, held her hand, and remained silent for long minutes, offering her presence as a safe harbor in the midst of the emotional storm. "I know how it feels," Helena eventually murmured, her voice imbued with an understanding that only personal experience could provide. "I know what it's like to feel like the whole world has caved in and that nobody understands your pain." The woman looked up, recognizing something in Helena's voice that indicated she truly understood, that these weren't just well-intentioned but empty words. "How do you cope?" she asked through her tears. "Day by day," Helena replied with brutal honesty. "Some days are harder than others, but I've learned that when we focus on caring for those we love, we find strengths we didn't know we had. And I've also learned that accepting help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom." Dr. Martinez observed this interaction from a distance, deeply moved by the practical wisdom Helena offered. She had transformed her own emotional scars into a source of healing for others, demonstrating how personal pain, when processed with courage and compassion, can become an instrument of healing. Over the months,
Helena became a beloved presence at the hospital. Staff greeted her warmly when she arrived for her volunteer shifts, patients specifically requested to see her, and family members frequently expressed gratitude for the difference she made in their darkest moments. Sandra, the receptionist who had initially treated Helena coldly, developed a particularly special relationship with her. Helena had completely forgiven the initial treatment she had received, recognizing that everyone has moments of failing to show compassion. Instead of harboring resentment, she had offered genuine friendship, and Sandra had responded with a significant personal transformation in her approach to her work. "Helena, you taught me that my job here is so much more important than I thought. Before, I saw people only as names on a list, cases to process. Now I understand that each person who comes through this counter is living a story, carrying concerns, hopes, and fears. It's completely changed how I do my job." Helena smiled with the characteristic humility that defined her. "Sandra, dear, you always had kindness in your heart. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us to use it." A year after the first encounter between Dr. Martinez and Helena, the hospital organized a small but meaningful ceremony to recognize exceptional volunteers. Helena was one of the honorees, not only for the time she dedicated to the hospital, but for the transformative impact her presence had had on the institutional culture. During her brief acceptance speech, Helena spoke with the same simplicity and authenticity that characterized her. "When I first came here, I was scared and felt invisible. Dr. Martinez showed me that one person can make all the difference in someone's life with a simple act of kindness. I learned that we all have the power to be that difference for someone. We don't need special titles or abundant resources. We just need a willingness to see the humanity in one another and to act with compassion." After the ceremony, Dr. Martinez approached Helena to congratulate her personally. "Mrs. Helena, I have to confess something. On that first day, when I decided to break protocol to let you see Gabriel, I thought I was doing you a favor. Now I realize it was you who did a favor for me and for all of us here." Helena shook her head in genuine confusion. "How's that, doctor?" "You reminded us why we do this work. You showed us that the most powerful healing often happens through simple and authentic human connections. Your presence here has transformed not only the lives of the families you console, but also the way we all approach our daily work." That night, as Dr. Martinez reflected on the year that had passed since his first encounter with Helena, he recognized that he had witnessed something extraordinary: the transformation of a moment of personal adversity into a lasting source of collective healing.
Helena had taken her experience of vulnerability and transmuted it into strength for others, creating an endless cycle of compassion that would continue to impact lives far beyond her own physical presence. Gabriel, now 13 and perfectly healthy, occasionally accompanied his grandmother on her volunteer shifts. Dr. Martinez observed with fascination how the boy had absorbed the lessons of compassion and service that Helena modeled daily. Gabriel frequently helped distribute flowers, chatted with hospitalized children, and demonstrated an emotional maturity remarkable for his age. "Grandma," Dr. Martinez heard Gabriel say one day, "when I grow up, I want to be a doctor like Dr. Martinez. But I want to be the kind of doctor who treats people the way you treated us." Helena smiled with a quiet pride that lit up her whole face. "My boy, you're already that kind of person. Doctor is just a title. What matters is having a heart willing to care for others." Dr. Martinez realized he was witnessing not only the immediate impact of compassion, but its intergenerational transmission. Gabriel was learning, through his grandmother's example, that true strength comes not from power or status, but from a willingness to serve others, especially those in vulnerable moments. Over the following years, Helena's story became part of the hospital's unofficial folklore. New staff frequently heard about the volunteer grandma who had transformed the hospital's culture through her gentle but powerful presence. Her example inspired other patients and family members to volunteer, creating a community of care that extended far beyond traditional medical functions. Dr. Martinez, who had been considering retirement when he met Helena, found new energy and purpose in his work. Her presence had rekindled his passion for humanistic medicine, constantly reminding him that healing happens on multiple levels and that every human interaction carries transformative potential. On his last day before retirement, 5 years after meeting Helena, Dr. Martinez made a point of finding her for a personal goodbye. He found her in the hospital garden, arranging fresh flowers in vases she had placed around to brighten the environment. "Mrs. Helena," he said, approaching with the same gentle respect that had characterized all their interactions over the years. She turned with the warm smile that had become her trademark at the hospital. "Dr. Martinez, I heard today's your last day. We're going to miss you." "Actually, I came to say goodbye personally because I wanted to thank you for everything you've meant, not just to me, but to this entire place." Helena was visibly moved, her hands still gently holding the flowers she was arranging. "Doctor, it was you who changed my life that first day." "No, Mrs. Helena," he gently interrupted. "You changed my life. You changed the lives of everyone here. You taught us that the most powerful medicine doesn't come from labs or textbooks. It comes from a human heart willing to connect with another human heart." They remained silent for a few moments, both reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had begun with a simple act of compassion and blossomed into a lasting legacy of care and service. "You know," Dr. Martinez eventually said, "I've been thinking a lot about that first day. If I hadn't made the decision to bend the rules, to simply treat you as a human being instead of another case to process, none of this would have happened. Sometimes the most profound changes start with the simplest decisions." Helena nodded, understanding the depth of what he was saying. "And if I had held on to resentment instead of gratitude, if I had closed myself off in my pain instead of using my experience to help others, none of this would have happened either. I think we both made choices that allowed something beautiful to grow." That final conversation perfectly encapsulated what had made the relationship between Dr. Martinez and Helena so special. It was grounded in the mutual recognition that each had played a crucial role in transforming the other. There was no savior and saved, but rather two people who had chosen to respond to circumstances with compassion and openness, creating ripples of impact that extended far beyond their personal interactions. After Dr. Martinez's retirement, Helena continued her volunteer work at the hospital. Her presence had become so integral to the hospital's culture that it was impossible to imagine the environment without her. New doctors frequently sought her advice on how to better connect with families in crisis, recognizing that she possessed a practical wisdom that no medical training program could provide. Gabriel, now in high school, had become an exceptional young man, clearly influenced by the values of compassion and service that his grandmother modeled daily. He frequently wrote essays for school about the importance of treating everyone with dignity, using the lessons he had learned observing Helena as the foundation for his own developing life philosophy. One day, a new family arrived at the hospital under circumstances similar to those Helena had experienced years before. It was an elderly grandmother, clearly of limited means, who had traveled a long distance to visit a hospitalized grandson. She was initially met with standard bureaucratic procedures, but Helena, who had witnessed the situation, discreetly intervened. Instead of waiting for a doctor to bend the rules, Helena used her established position as a respected volunteer to facilitate an out-of-hours visit. She accompanied the woman to her grandson's room, offering not only compassion but also the wisdom of someone who had walked the same path. "I know exactly how you're feeling," Helena said gently, as they walked down the halls she now knew like the back of her hand. "The worry, the feeling of helplessness, the love that hurts because it's so intense." The woman looked at Helena with gratitude and recognition. "How can you understand so well?"
Because I've been there, and I learned that when we receive compassion in our most difficult moments, our responsibility is to pass that compassion on. Dr. Martinez, who had returned to the hospital as a volunteer consultant after his retirement, witnessed this interaction from a distance. He smiled, recognizing that Helena had become exactly the kind of person he had been to her years before. Someone willing to bend the rules when humanity demanded it. Someone who understood that true healing happens when people connect with people. The cycle had been completed, yet it was only just beginning. Helena had planted seeds of compassion that would continue to sprout and blossom far beyond her own presence, through the lives she had touched, and that, in turn, would touch others. Years later, when Gabriel graduated from medical school, he made sure to dedicate his graduation to his grandmother.
In his valedictorian speech, he spoke about the lessons he learned, not in classrooms or labs, but watching a woman who had transformed her own vulnerability into a source of strength for countless others. My grandmother taught me that being a doctor isn't just about diagnosing illnesses or prescribing treatments, he said to an audience of proud families and fellow future physicians. It's about recognizing the humanity in every person who crosses our path, especially those the world tends to make invisible. It's about understanding that every interaction we have carries the potential to transform lives, not just the life of the person we're treating, but our own lives as well. Helena, sitting in the audience with tears of pride streaming down her face, recognized that her own story had found its ultimate purpose: to inspire a new generation of healers who understood that true medicine happens in the sacred space where one human heart meets another. The story that had begun with a cold morning and a protocol broken by compassion had become a legacy that would continue to impact lives for generations. And all because two people, an experienced doctor and a devoted grandmother, had chosen to respond to a moment of human need with kindness instead of indifference, with flexibility instead of rigidity, with love instead of fear. Ultimately, the most powerful lesson that emerged from this experience was deceptively simple. In a world that often seems cold and impersonal, a single act of genuine compassion can create ripples of transformation that spread infinitely, touching lives in ways we can never fully quantify or understand. And that each of us, regardless of our position or circumstances, possesses the power to be that catalyst of transformation for someone in need at the exact moment they need it most. Kindness isn't a luxury or an optional courtesy. It's the most powerful force available for individual and collective healing. And when we choose to exercise it, especially on behalf of those society often overlooks, we not only transform their lives, but discover the truest and noblest version of ourselves.